My name's Michael Barasch. I'm managing partner of Barasch McGarry, Lawyers for the 9/11 Community, and I'm thrilled that you joined us today. We're going to be discussing the health program, the Victim Compensation Fund, and then we're going to leave some time for questions. There's some deadlines that we want the 9/11 community to be aware of. We know that a lot of the New Jersey responders think that these benefits set up by Congress are only for New York City firefighters and cops. That is not true. Joining me today is Dom Penson, is my longtime partner. That's Dom waving his hand. Dom runs our family assistance team with Dana Cohen. Also joining me is my partner, Lee London, and Richie Allis, Deputy Chief, FDNY, retired. Richie, wave your hand. We can't see it. There you go. And my associate, James Steiner, my associate, Jennifer Jimenez, and Val Velasquez-Stetz. What are you doing here?
I work here.
Oh, okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I retired from Jersey City Police Department, and
you were a 9/11 responder as well, right?
Definitely a 9/11 responder.
Okay, and is there anyone you'd like to introduce today?
I would like to introduce Captain John Crystal. He's still active. He's the SOA president for Newark Police Department.
Thank you all for joining us. Let's get right into it with a short 3-minute video, and then we'll come back to you.
The first thing that I hear from the non-first responder community in Lower Manhattan is, look, I'm sick, but I don't deserve anything. I'm not a first responder. I just lived here. I just studied here. I just went to school here. I just raised a family here. Your presence here was an act of courage and resilience. The first responders, I'm in awe. But I also am in great awe of those who came back to a war-torn neighborhood that was clearly toxic. We knew it, but you stayed anyway, and you allowed this area to grow and to become the hub. But it's your courage and your resilience that brought this place back. So please, I urge you, access what you are owed.
Over the last decade, we have all fought very hard so that everyone has access to the health care that they need. It is very important that every community member who lived anywhere south of Houston understands that you are covered. You are part of the group of people that have guaranteed health care if you have a 9/11 related disease.
I was on my way to work when the first plane hit. I was working for Goldman Sachs. I actually worked for them for a total of 21 years. I always thought that those programs were geared for the firemen and the police officers, but I'm one of the victims of that.
So we have taken on, with all of these advocates here, the task of trying to get everyone to understand that they have rights, and it is imperative that they sign up.
One of the really surprising things about our research is that an event in 2001 can continue to have echoes 17 and 18 years later, such that it is as though never smokers are smoking 2 packs a day.
My law firm represents over 15,000 people in the 9/11 community. And the majority right now are first responders, but every single day we hear from more and more survivors because we're doing this outreach. Basically, to be entitled to compensation, you need to prove that you were below Canal Street or on the Fresh Kills landfill, either caught in the dust cloud on 9/11 or for 24 hours during the month of September 2001, or for 80 hours, which is just 2 full work weeks between 9/11 and May 30th of 2002. And you need to get 2 people to sign an affidavit attesting to the fact that I saw him. I worked next to Joe. I went to school next to Francis. That's all it takes. There's a reason why my firm takes all this so personally. I have 6 young people who work for me who have lost a parent or a spouse as a result of World Trade Center toxins. 9 people in my law firm, including me, are cancer survivors. The information you get from us is going to be compassionate, and it's our pleasure to help you.
So as you saw from the video, the population of the 9/11 community isn't just the 100,000 responders and volunteers. There were 300,000 office workers, including tens of thousands of people from New Jersey who commuted in every day. there were 50,000 students and teachers. And while this may not pertain to the audience today, it's heartbreaking when I get calls from 28-year-old women with breast cancer. And then there were about 25,000 downtown residents. So today we're here to talk about the New Jersey responders, whether you were assigned or volunteered. As I said earlier, you were exposed to the same exact toxins. You're entitled to the same health program, which is out in New Jersey as well. It's not just in New York, it's all over the country. You'll be learning this. And you're entitled to the same compensation as the New York City firefighters and cops. God forbid you get sick or you lose your career because of your 9/11 illness. So let's start with our first slide. There are two distinct areas that you need to know about. First of all, anyone who was south of Houston Street, and many of the volunteers from Jersey, and we represent now hundreds of firefighters and cops from New Jersey. Many of you were up below Houston Street. Anyone in that area, below Houston Street, all the way to the tip of Manhattan, is entitled to free health care for 9/11 illnesses for the rest of your life. And if you were also below Canal Street or at the Fresh Kills landfill in Staten Island, you'd also be entitled to compensation. So two separate areas, but as you can see on the right side, only 7% of the civilians have registered so far, which is something we really are trying to change. So if you do know any commuters who worked or lived in, who worked in Lower Manhattan on or after 9/11, please spread the word to them that they are entitled as well. All right, James, would you take us through this slide, please?
So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the most common 9/11 related illnesses that we see that have been caused by exposure to the toxins that were released on 9/11. So you see on your screen here, it's set into two categories. There are cancers and non-cancerous conditions. Some of the most common cancers are skin cancer, including basal cell, squamous cell, and melanoma. One interesting note about the skin cancers is you may treat for, go to your World Trade Center Health Program annual exam. They may not look for skin cancers. So make sure you get those looked for by your private dermatologist. Some of the more common cancers also include prostate cancer of the thyroid and of the breast, and blood cancers, including melanoma, leukemia, lymphoma, and the like. You also unfortunately see solid cancers throughout other organs like the lungs, the kidneys, colon cancer, and bladder cancer. Although over 68 cancers are covered now, we also see a lot of non-cancerous conditions. The most common are pulmonary, respiratory, and sinuses. If you think about it, you're breathing in that toxic dust, so it's no surprise that those systems are affected. We see interstitial lung disease, pulmonary fibrosis, sarcoidosis, also emphysema, and GERD, sleep apnea, asthma, illnesses that you may think, even things like allergic rhinitis, you may think you have typical allergies. Those can be traced back to your World Trade Center exposure. So those are definitely conditions you want to bring to the attention of the World Trade Center Health Program, which we'll talk about in a little more detail in just a minute.
James, there's one word on this slide in bright red color, the word presumed. Can you explain what that means?
I'm so glad you brought it up because that is such an important point. The law presumes that your cancers or non-cancerous conditions are linked to your World Trade Center exposure so long as you satisfy the exposure criteria. In other words, even if you have a family history of a certain condition, or if you have skin cancer and you spend a lot of time in the sun, even though there may be other reasonable causes for your diagnosis, the law will presume that your illness is linked to your exposure because you have exposure to those 9/11 toxins. So historically, a person had 2 years to register with the Victim Compensation Fund. As you see right here on your screen in red, that deadline has been changed to July 29 of 2021, which is just around the corner. And the reason for that is so many responders and even non-responders have illnesses that have been certified by the World Trade Center Health Program as being 9/11 far before they actually knew about the Victim Compensation Fund. So what was happening is that people who had illnesses that were certified by the government as being 9/11 related were time barred from filing for compensation. The VCF recognized that so many people were being disqualified for compensation, so they extended that deadline. That deadline is coming up. It is around the corner, July 29th of this year, which is why it is so important that we spread the word now. That's why we're doing this outreach. We're so glad you're tuned in. If you take one thing away from this, we hope it's that you spread the word to people who you know that were exposed, because we want to make sure if they have certified conditions, or if God forbid they know someone who has passed away from a 9/11 related illness, that family registers now before it's too late.
And I just have to say that thank God the Victim Compensation Fund and the health program have both been extended till 2090 for any new illnesses that are certified in the future, or any new deaths in the future. But this deadline pertains to people who were certified already, or who lost a family member more than 2 years ago. Yeah, Richie, this is a good one. I'd like you to discuss this. Deputy Chief Richie Allis, and this will go right into the health program discussion. Richie, would you discuss this a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. Good morning to my brothers and sisters in law enforcement and fire. John, I was a union thug like yourself. I was the legislative and political director for the fire officers in New York City for 9 years. And I use the term thug affectionately because that's what the enemies of unions call us. So yeah, the health program keys in on pulmonary issues. That's the most common ailment affecting people in the 9/11 community, things like asthma and COPD, this interstitial lung disease, quite common. Also, sinus issues, extremely common. And then it moves on to the gastrointestinal illnesses, things like acid reflux. People think that's not, gee, I just have a little bit of acid reflux. Well, it can gravitate up to the point of becoming Barrett's esophagus, which is the more serious form, and then leading from there to esophageal cancer, which, you don't want to deal with. And then over 70 different cancers. And John, I think that the important issue I want to point out to you is the active members, they kind of, they have to get an annual medical exam, do the job. So it's hard for them to hide from these illnesses. But when any of us, retire, then there's no one making sure that they get this annual physical. And for when I see on my end, those that run into problems are those that are not getting their annual medical exam. It's like see no evil, hear no evil, or they go for a medical exam and everything was okay this year. And when you're retired, time flies and it's like 2 years, 3 years. And then all of a sudden they become symptomatic on something. And as horrendous as all these illnesses are, a lot are treatable and curable, but if found in a timely manner. So those that kind of stick their head in the sand are the ones that run into a problem because they're behind the 8 ball by the time something has been diagnosed in them.
Yeah, so Richie, would you talk, if you don't mind, sharing some personal experiences about your own treatment at the health program?
Yeah, well, I mean, I go every year, and what I do is I see my primary care physician once a year, and I spread it out. 6 months later, I schedule my annual World Trade Center medical. And as James pointed out, skin cancer, which is really the most common cancer and also rivaling the respiratory illnesses as being the most common ailment, is something that's not screened for by the health program because it would be too expensive to have a dermatologist on staff. So we always recommend everyone go for a annual skin exam with a dermatologist. I happen to have gotten picked up at my World Trade Center annual medical because the doctor, as we were talking, noticed something on my neck, which really I had never noticed myself. I mean, I thought maybe it was just, a freckle because I have freckles. Anyway, he recommended that I make an appointment with a dermatologist, and I kind of did, grudgingly. It was like, okay, I went, and I turned out to have skin cancer, which is not a life-threatening illness in most cases. In mine, it wasn't, but I ended up with a 5-inch scar on my neck for something that looked like basically, the size of a freckle. I had a colleague who's a client of our firm a year ago on a more serious note, same thing. And because, just to let everyone know, this is not something that's just sun exposure, but the pH of the air down at ground zero was the same as Drano. So those fine particles that get under the skin can wreak havoc in your body. So a colleague, a chief in the fire department in his mid-50s, impeccable health, marathoner, dark olive skin, but he developed some rashes on his arm, had heard our spiel, and made an appointment with a dermatologist, and it saved his life. As it turned out, the rash on his arm was nothing to be concerned about, but the doctor noticed a slight discoloration on one of his fingernails. He didn't like it. Went into the biopsy. The biopsy came back, and not only was it skin cancer, it was melanoma, the most aggressive form. So they had to cut the tip of his finger off. He had to undergo some chemo because those cancer cells can find their way into your lymph node system and pop out somewhere else. But at the end of the day, this is a great story to share because he's alive and well and completely healthy. Had he not, gone, I could very well be telling a completely different story. So it's very important. So this annual medical exam, critically important, and especially for the retirees.
Thank you, Richie. Val, would you share your story about skin cancer and what were you doing on 9/11 or in the weeks after?
So, Jersey City actually was sent over to bring people and help out and assist. And, we just thought we were doing our job same way we do every other day. So, years later, 2008, I had a little skin tag by my eye, right over here, and my nose, in between my eye and nose. And it was just ugly. So I just didn't want it on my face. And so I went to a skin doctor, a dermatologist, and, they took it off in like 2 seconds. And they said, we're going to send it to a lab. And I was like, for what? And they just said, no, we just do that as protocol. But he said, 95% or whatever, very high in the 90s, that everything's fine with you because of, my mom's Italian, my dad's Puerto Rican. So I have olive skin and I'm like, okay, I'm good. That only happens, to the fair skin. So I went home 2 weeks later. They happened to call and say that C word that everyone hates, and said it was a basal cell carcinoma. And I'm like, what is that? Like, why did I get it? And, I don't know anyone in my family that had that. What do you mean? I didn't understand it. So they were like, well, you have to have a surgery, to take it out. And they had to dig deep, and I had to get a plastic surgeon to close it up. So it was pretty serious and traumatic for females, your face, And then later on, a couple of years later, I had one on my leg that I had to remove also. And so now I get checked out all the time because of this. And I didn't know it was 9/11 related until I met Michael. He told me that. So I was like, well, how do I know it was 9/11? Maybe I was just going to get it because, I go to the beach. I love the beach. And maybe that was why. And he's like, it's a presumption, like, he explained earlier, which is very important because, going forward, any other illnesses that you may get, you would be covered for, and your family as well, if something should ever happen to you down the line. So that meant the most to me because I do have 2 children and they mean the most to me.
Thank you for sharing that. Richie, I'd like you to go back to you from your personal experience. How much does it cost you for your out-of-pocket medical expenses?
Zero. And it's a good point. Again, I want to focus, to let John know that the prescriptions, that you see it on the screen there, any prescription medicine that's required for any 9/11 related illness is fully paid for by the federal government. Now, all of us, in unions, we have union prescription plans, and we drive the point home in New York City and let our members know, never, ever, ever go in your pocket.
Okay, Lee, would you take us through this? This is Lee London.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, everybody. And one thing I just wanted to mention that Richie spoke about was, as a first responder, you do not have to be sick to join the World Trade Center Health Program. A survivor, a student, a teacher, a worker that worked in the zone, they have to be sick and have an actual diagnosed condition to join the World Trade Center Health Program. If you are a first responder from New Jersey, if you volunteered there, you do not have to be sick to join the program. So going for those yearly evaluations are so key because that's how the health program adds new conditions. They need the research. They need more data on people in the 9/11 community and what they're suffering from 20 years later. It's the only way they'll be able to add new conditions into the fund. Cancer was not covered by the Victim Compensation Fund or was able to be certified when it first started in 2011. It finally got added years later because they had the data to support it. That's why it's so important. If you're a first responder, there should be no reason why you haven't registered for the VCF or joined the World Trade Center Health Program for free yearly evaluations. You're around people in the 9/11 community that could be suffering from the same thing that you are. But this slide in front of me right now focuses on the Victim Compensation Fund, which is the other side. So when the Zadroga Act was created, it was broken down into two entities. You have the World Trade Center Health Program on one side, which is free medical care coverage for the rest of your life. And then on the other side, you have the Victim Compensation Fund, which is a monetary award for your pain and suffering from your respiratory or cancer condition. You can make a loss of earnings claims, out-of-pocket medical expense claims. But let me first start talking about the non-economic loss claims for the Victim Compensation Fund. So if somebody has non-cancerous conditions, let's say they have asthma, we're encouraging everybody, even if your asthma is controllable, register, make a claim for the asthma now. Because God forbid in 5 years from now, you get diagnosed with bladder cancer, your proof of presence has been satisfied and we're just amending your claim. You never waive your future legal right. So if I get you an award for asthma, and asthma awards can range from 20 to 90,000 because you can have two people diagnosed with asthma. One person uses a nasal rinse once a week. The other person had 8 surgeries. The person with 8 surgeries is more severe. They'll get a higher award than somebody who doesn't have all of those surgeries. But the best part about the Victim Compensation Fund is that in 5 years from now, let's say you had those surgeries, we can amend your claim for an increased award. That is the best part. You never waive your future legal right. Cancer claims, skin cancer ranges from 90,000 to 250,000, melanoma being the most severe, and all life-threatening cancers can range from 200,000 to 340,000. Just if you get an award for, let's say, breast cancer or prostate cancer and you're working, and then 2 years later, you're forced out of work due to your cancer or any 9/11 related physical condition, we can make a loss of earnings claim for you and amend your claim for an economic loss award to make you whole again. So that's why this fund is so important. Not only has been extended to outlive us all, but you never waive your future legal right. God forbid something happens in the future.
All right, Dom, would you start with the death benefits and also talk about that deadline that James alluded to for the personal injury claims?
I will, thank you. But before I do, I want to point out something that we haven't discussed with you yet that's really critically important. When Lee says that you should register now, part of what he's saying is that you should get your proof of presence. We've talked about the presumption. If you have a World Trade Center illness, it doesn't matter if your doctor doesn't think it's connected. It doesn't matter what your family history is. If it's a World Trade Center illness and you have it, it's presumed to be linked to your exposure, provided, as James told you at the outset, provided you meet the other criteria. Really, it's one other criterion, and that is that you were in the exposure zone for the requisite period of time, okay? And how much time depends upon when you were there. But the important thing to know is that you have to present some evidence to the Victim Compensation Fund of your presence in the zone. It's now, we're on the eve of the 20th anniversary of the attacks, right? It's getting harder and harder for people to establish that they were in the exposure zone because their witnesses are becoming harder to find because people's memories fade with time, because people pass away, they move away. There's a lot of reasons. It gets more and more difficult. And as Michael said, I oversee all of the claims that we file on behalf of families who lost a loved one. It's even harder for those families because they weren't the ones to be down at ground zero. So finding somebody to establish that their loved one was down there is hard, okay? So we encourage everybody, even if you're well, even if you're not ill at all, to collect that evidence now. Find a couple of witnesses, people that you worked with, have them do an affidavit for you, show us the affidavit to make sure that it's okay. And we'll bank those affidavits, or you bank those affidavits so that you have them. And that's why Lee says register now. Because if you register now, that's what you'll register. And then if you register with the health program, you get into the health program, they will require you to present that evidence. It's critically important, okay? with respect to these awards that you see on this slide, if heaven forbid, somebody loses a loved one to a World Trade Center illness, their family is entitled, if their loved one never filed a claim at all in life for their World Trade Center illness, then the family can collect the award that they were entitled to, the award that Lee described to you moments ago. In addition to that, the family is entitled to a wrongful death award, which means an additional amount of money for the pain and suffering that their loved one went through. And if, as a result of the death, there were lost earnings, the family can recover the lost earnings. And there are direct awards to dependents and surviving spouses. There are different categories of damages. And they can be very substantial. They can add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. And then the last thing I'll say, which is about that deadline that's also on this slide, which you heard about before. I have to tell you that most of the families on whose behalf we file claims are claims that are older than 2 years old still. That's the reality. Because these benefits are not well publicized by the government, and because many of these cancers that are now eligible were not always eligible. So you had people, first responders and other survivors, passing away for years at a time when they were not entitled to these benefits. Then the law changed. These cancers were added as eligible conditions, and all of a sudden these families had rights that they didn't have before and they didn't know about. So this is why we are very passionate about spreading the word and letting everybody know about these benefits. If you know somebody who was down around Ground Zero, below Canal Street in Manhattan on 9/11, or during the 8.5 months after 9/11, tell them about these benefits. And if you know anybody who lost somebody who was down there on 9/11 or during the 8.5 months after, tell them about these death benefits that families are entitled to, just in case they passed away from a World Trade Center illness. Their family can take advantage of this.
Jennifer Jimenez, thank you for joining us. Jennifer is on the family assistance team, and we actually had to create an entire team just for our wrongful death clients, because not a day goes by without at least 2 of our clients dying now. It's just heartbreaking. But Jennifer, would you tell everybody what you think they should be doing now?
Sure, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. So in front of you, here's a list of several things that are important, of things that you can do now, which most we've already touched upon. So there's basically 2 things that I want to focus on that you can really do now to help you and your family. In addition to spreading the word to people you know who may benefit from the fund, one of the most important things that you can do right now is talk to your family and talk to them now. Make them aware that these benefits exist. One of the things that we often see is family members will come to us years after their loved one has passed away because they never even heard about the fund. And as you've heard multiple times throughout this webinar, once the July 29th deadline passes, families only have 2 years from the date of death to file a claim. And we cannot always expect that our families will have this just fall into their laps within that 2-year period after your passing. So you want to make sure that they know about this and that they know that they can file once you pass away, and they have to do it within 2 years. The second thing I want to touch upon is get a will. I cannot stress how important it is to get a will. If you have a will, it is your way of letting everyone know where you want your assets to go. If you don't have a will, your assets get passed through what's called intestacy, which is basically a formula set up by the government where your assets will go. Some of these VCF award monies will go to your estate, and by having your will, you can ensure that the parties that you know will benefit the most of this will actually receive the funds. In addition, having a will can also streamline the process in setting up your estate, sometimes even up to a year quicker in some cases. So we just cannot stress how important it is to always get a will, and get a will now.
Yeah, even if you're healthy, especially if you're healthy, when you can do that. Jennifer, what's the biggest obstacle or challenge you think you have in the family assistance team that keeps coming up over and over again?
Well, in addition to having a will set up, I would probably say getting affidavits, which is something that Dom stressed on earlier. As he said, we're on the eve of the 20th anniversary. And right now, getting proof that someone was in the zone, especially if that person's already passed away, a lot of times the spouse or the widow or their children who might be filing the claim years after someone has passed away. They don't know the people that the decedent used to work with. So getting the affidavits now while you're alive, while you're still in contact with those people, will definitely save a lot of heartache down the road for your family members who might want to make a claim for you.
Yeah, John, tell us from your experience, what do you hear among your men? Is there reluctance, or is it just a lack of knowledge about the benefits they are entitled to?
Well, my opinion, I think it's a lack of knowledge. I'm learning a lot right now, just sitting here on this webinar. We're definitely going to spread the word around. I think it's just a lack of knowledge. A lot of people may say, well, I went there, but I'm suffering those symptoms. This is an eye opener. And I believe that everybody who went there should just at least sign up just to preserve your rights, just in case. And then I see it comes to mind that a couple of our retired members have passed away from certain diseases, which could have been related to this, where I know you see that they were personally over there. And a lot of issues may be with maybe members, having people verify that they were there. I mean, we have members that can verify that they were there. People remember who went those days, but I think it's a lack of knowledge. And I'm learning a lot right now. Knowledge is power.
Yeah, it really is. Thank you. Make that claim for GERD or asthma now, because even though it's not about the money, you're getting $10,000 or $20,000. It's about your family. It's about protecting your family in case 30 years from now you get cancer and die from that cancer. Your family's entitled to financial security. But if you're not around to say, hey, here are our witnesses, it's going to be really tough for your family. Hillary, I know we've been getting a bunch of questions. Do you have any questions that you want to ask the panel?
Yeah, so we received a few questions. Someone said, I have no health insurance and can't afford to go to the dermatologist. Can I ask LHI to have a dermatologist exam?
Richie, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, no. The only way you can get a referral to a dermatologist is if you've already had skin cancer. Once you have it, then in the future, you can get a referral to go to a dermatologist. So unfortunately, no, that's not something possible if they've never been diagnosed before.
All right, but Lee, would you tell us, what is someone like that who spends money, who has no health insurance, who goes for an appointment and is diagnosed with a basal cell, squamous cell, and melanoma, what can they do about getting reimbursed?
So great question, Michael. Save every out-of-pocket medical receipt that you have, confirmation that you paid for it, and it was related to a 9/11 related physical condition, and we could make that claim to the Victim Compensation Fund to get that reimbursed back to you. Now, there are limits for how much it has to add up to for out-of-pocket. So that's why I say to everybody, save every receipt you pay for, because if you're not in the health program and you're paying anything out of pocket, we can get that reimbursed to you, but you must save everything. Once you're in the program and you're certified, you're expected to get your medicals through the health program. But for right now, I would go out of pocket, save it, get that test done because it could save your life, and then bring it to the health program.
Hillary, we have time probably for one more question.
Okay, we have one. Someone said, I have registered with the New Jersey pension system, but is the VCF a separate filing? I am a retired New Jersey.
They are separate, but the fact that you were found disabled by another governmental agency, such as in New Jersey, the Victim Compensation Fund will take notice of that and render an award based on your disability, which is fabulous. Now, one last thing, I see some people are complaining of the frustration. I requested my records, but they're not available. A lot of doctors, a lot of hospitals destroy their records. I'm sorry about that. Talk to us privately about that. There are certain ways around it, and you can always have a chance to testify at a hearing, and you'll talk about, and these are non-adversarial hearings. The hearing officers want to help you. And you can talk about how I went to Dr. Jones and Dr. Smith and I was treated at this hospital, but unfortunately it was more than 10 years ago. Those records don't exist. We'll get a letter from the doctor or hospital confirming that they don't keep the records, but you were a patient. You know, whatever we can give them is great, and don't give up. as John Stewart says, access what you are entitled to. All right, so I want to thank John Crystal for joining us today. We're very honored to have the president of the Newark Superior Officers Association today. And all of you, stay safe out there.